Hey guys, good to see you all. I'm a little bit sleepy, so I'm going to be drinking intermittently some of this coffee. Hope you guys are all doing great. So there's a poll out. If you haven't voted, make sure you do. I see only 4% think that Ginger was the most important woman in Elvis's life. I guess it's also something one can say, at what time, relative to when. She obviously was quite important to him in his life, right at the end. But so was Lisa Marie, 24%, second most votes. Priscilla, 11%. And then most of you so far voted for his mother Gladys, 66%. That's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. So we'll see how that changes through the course of this episode. Right. How are you all doing? How are you guys? So this is quite an interesting episode. I almost titled this episode Elvis Hit Me. That was the one title I thought of. Another title was Elvis Kissed Like a God. That was the other title. But in the end, it sort of just went with a kind of a generic sort of thing. So let's just bring up this image here. So yeah, we're kind of going to go into, let me just share. We're going to go into Elvis's love life, but I guess, there's no way we can actually go through. Imagine if we could actually find out, like right now, how many girls did Elvis kiss? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? I know in the movie Elvis, there's a scene where he's performing in Vegas and he does really well, and then he sort of smooches about 5 or 10 women, even though his wife's sitting right there in the audience, and you kind of think she's not going to be very thrilled about this. And then when she sees him, she's like, "You were amazing." Like every single woman's in love with him, and they don't care that every other woman is in love with him as well. So, that's the joy of being a rock star, I guess. It's not like, oh, you're cheating on me, or oh, you looked at somebody else. It's like, you are amazing. But is it the fairy tale that everyone thinks it is? Is it really an amazing, is the whole thing really what it's cracked out to be? Um, True Jedi Forever says, I'm sure it's in the thousands. Yeah, I also think so. So, although it probably is in the thousands, we are going to look at just 10 women that are, that were quite important. Yes, very important to me in Elvis's life. And we're going to find some, as usual, some sort of intrigue in all of this. And I want to follow this on with a look at the men that were important in Elvis's life. And it's obviously going to be totally different. It's not men having relationships with him. It's friends of his, and that's really going to be a very interesting episode juxtaposed to this one. I don't think I'm going to be doing it tomorrow, though. I don't think it's going to be on. It won't be Wednesday because I'm doing another Van Gogh letters, and it won't be Thursday because I want to take Thursday off. I just need a bit of a break. So we'll probably do that Friday or even Saturday. We'll see, Friday or Saturday. So that's the plan. Maria Newcomb, it's an appropriate surname given what you're saying. Heat wave in Vancouver finally over. So you guys have been nuked by really high temperatures, but that is at least over now. That's good. Okay, so I'm just trying to sort of wake up a little bit. I did have a bit of a nap, but I think all the cockpit lights are starting to sort of come on. Okay, so let's get going. So I want you guys to think as we start going through this, are sex symbols as sexy in reality as they are in fantasies? Is reality ever a match for daydreams of perfection? Now, let's just by way of analogy, think about Marilyn Monroe, right? Here's a picture of her, one that you might not have seen before. Obviously, sexy lady, and she's surrounded with some of the most powerful men in the world, right, at that time. Now, I remember as a young boy watching Superman and being like, I can't believe he's giving up all his strength for, there's a scene in the Superman with Christopher Reeve where a woman lures him into sort of a subterranean lair of Lex Luthor. And I think she ends up putting a chain around his neck with a sort of rock of kryptonite, and then he becomes obviously very weak. And as a little boy, I remember watching that and thinking, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to be let a woman make me weak, kind of thing. And then you'd see something similar in a way with James Bond, kind of thing, right? But this is the opposite. This is woman becoming weak in the presence of the king, right? But just to get ourselves in the right frame of mind, in a way, let's talk a little bit about Marilyn Monroe just for about 1 or 2 minutes. And did you guys know the following? It's really going to be just a brief look at her. Did you know? So it's this whole idea of, is a sex symbol really that sexy? Did you know that Marilyn's mother was mentally ill? Did you know that? And it's not just like she was mentally ill, but she sort of went about her business. And did you know that her name was also Gladys? Marilyn's mother's name, it's the same name as Elvis's mother. Did you know that her agent told Marilyn to say that her mother was dead if anyone asked about her, right? Even though her mother was alive, she had to say she was dead because admitting her mother was institutionalized. Well, that just wasn't sexy. Did you know that Marilyn didn't know who her father was? Did you know right after Marilyn was photographed in the iconic dress floating over the subway grill scene, looking beautiful and happy, her husband, the baseball great Joe DiMaggio, he apparently beat her up. The day after the billowy white skirt scene, Marilyn was found with bruises on her back and shoulders that had to be covered up with makeup. Ever heard that before anywhere? Less than a month later, Marilyn filed for divorce. So one of the sort of sideshow issues, one of the byproducts of being in a relationship or a marriage with, a goddess or a god or just a very sexy person, is jealousy. Not much fun. So when it comes to Elvis, there he is with Sybil Shepherd. These are some of the women that he's been with. When it comes to Elvis, we want to ask some general questions. Given that he was in an untenable situation with the colonel, could one of his women friends, could a woman close to him have saved him? Shouldn't one of those women have saved him? We're going to go through a list of 10 women, and you guys must ask yourself, couldn't this woman maybe have saved him? And did this woman actually try to save him, kind of thing? And if so, which one? Which woman of the 10 that we're going to go through saved him? And if you say, let's say you say one of them could have saved him more than another, which one could have saved him the most? That could be another poll question. So before we kind of get started on that, What do you think? There he is holding a magazine dealing with the Beatles. So what do you guys, if you just, I don't know how many of you know his girlfriends, but if you just had to think who theoretically had the best chance of saving him, or the best reason to save him, or you know what I mean? So you ask the question now, see what you guys say, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Just to add a little bit of what's the word? Critical thinking to an otherwise, it's otherwise celebrity entertainment. We just want to be a little bit more thoughtful while we go through it. Beverly Lawyer says Norma Jean was friends with Robert Mitchum. Joan White says Priscilla could have saved him or should have saved him. Blue Flame says Anne Margaret. Fourth Man says Linda. Pauline Buckles also says Priscilla. Stephanie says Priscilla, the mother of his daughter. I think that's a smart answer. I mean, she has a long-term connection to him, but does she have any kind of what is her influence over him ultimately? We're going to talk about Priscilla. We're also going to talk about Lisa Marie. John Hammer says, save him. No, most weren't around to even know him. Yes and no. I mean, I think you're right. Most weren't around, but there are a lot of the ones we're going to go through now were actually around a lot longer than you might think. And then the question is sort of, what were they doing when they were together, right? Was it, was it a loyal, faithful relationship? Was it a deep relationship? Was it all a thrill ride? Was it sort of a little bit of both? Or was it basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll next kind of thing? That's a great comment from Bridget Bowman. Only Elvis could save himself. But that's true. But we kind of want to see it from the perspective of, okay, if a woman could or should have saved him, who would be the one to do that? That's really how we want to put it. But I see what you're saying, and it's true. We've got to save ourselves. Yvonne Phillips also says Priscilla. So quite a few of you guys are saying Priscilla. Remember, Priscilla is the only woman that he married, and the only woman who we know of that was the father of his daughter. Okay, Holly Golightly says Mama. I tend to agree that if his mama didn't die, Elvis may have been a different Elvis. If Mama was still at the mansion, would it have been the Playboy mansion that it was? And I think I know the answer to that question, but we need to get there still. Yvonne Phillips says, I didn't know he dated Peggy Lipton. I love her. I've got to say, I love Sybil Shepherd. She, to me, is very, very hot, very, very sexy. And I'm like, wow, Elvis, you lucky bugger. True Jedi says, would love to know if any of his close relationships were women who did not partake in drugs, right? There's another way of asking that question, which is, were there some women who said, I can't do this. This is a bit much, right? What do you think the answer is to that? Ricardo says, I thought Anne Margaret was a good match. I'm sorry, but we're not really going to be dealing with Anne Margaret in these 10. We had to cap it somewhere. And the fact that I included Priscilla and Lisa Marie meant that's, in a way, two other women that we couldn't have dealt with. So, yeah, let's get going. Stephanie says, there were a number, I'm sure. Okay. Okay, so let's go into another image here. There, Elvis is in the army, well, in an army uniform with mom and dad. Mom looks pretty nervous, and you kind of get the idea that she did have a fairly nervous temperament, don't you? And you can see he's standing next to her and he's also holding her. There's Graceland, and that's the same as the title image. So I think we're going to start off with this lady right here. Anyone know who this is? Can you see where the cursor is? Does anyone know who that is? Anyone know who this person is right here? We see her again there and not there and not there. That's her. So Julie says that pic of Elvis and Anne Margaret got lucky with the genetic soup. Both are incredible looking. That is Ginger. Yeah, so that's who we're going to be starting with. That's who his life ended with. So that's who we're going to be starting with. I'm going to try and play a little bit of audio here and there. It may work, it may not work. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to kind of mute myself sometimes, but anyway, we'll see how it works. If it doesn't work, we won't continue. So the other side to this, so besides looking at which woman knew him the best, loved him the best, and had some sort of power or control or influence over him the best, we also want to know, we want to get to know Elvis better. There's sort of a sense of who is the real Elvis? Is he really shy? Um, is there something eating at him? Was he just a fun-loving guy? Was he as sexy as he seemed, right? And so this is one way to sort of get into that conversation. Um, was he a gentle lover? Was he a faithful husband? What do you think the answers are to those questions? I think a more interesting question is the gender sensitive one. And and this is it. Who are the more sycophantic followers of Elvis? The men in his life or the women? I think that's quite an interesting question. Let me put that up. Who do you think were the more sycophantic followers of Elvis, the men in his life or the women? I think the question, you've got to qualify it. I think you could say that the overall women sort of in the audience were very sycophantic, but I think you could also say the men who hung around him every day, so his friends, the people that were sort of around him, perhaps even including his father, were particularly sycophantic. And you can almost imagine the women who were in relationship with him were less, what's the word? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe were they less caught up in everything? But you'll see that there's a little bit of pushback from some of these women. And you've got to ask, do you think the men told Elvis no, or were they sycophantic? Quite a few are saying the men. I think it could be the men, but it's a little bit of a tough one. Again, you've got to, it's in a way six of one, half a dozen of the other. Holly says women. Ricardo says men. Julie says the men. Yeah, so it's one of those things where the woman wanted to be with him and the men wanted to be him, kind of thing. Pauline says I had to look that word up, really. Yeah, that's a good point from 12th Man. He says the man in the group, the Memphis Mafia. So I must say, I can't wait to talk about the hairdresser who had a particularly close, warm, um, I thought, not influential, but he had a genuine love for Elvis, um, that, you know, a sort of caring love, and I really can't wait to sort of talk about his story. Okay, so let's try and get down to brass tacks. If you think about it, Elvis was in dire need of proper management in life and career, and you're actually going to find it as well. He also needed a little bit of help in his love life. He needed some guidance, and it's going to be quite interesting who gives him guidance in a particular area. We'll get to that. So where was he getting the best counseling? Was he getting it from his male friends? Was he getting it from his father, his manager, or the woman in his life? You decide. And without further ado, let's start with Ginger Alden. So there's a 13-minute interview from 1978 posted onto YouTube. And while I was researching Elvis, certain other things, I started being recommended videos of various women in his life, and I watched one after the other. And I was really fascinated how you could travel through time in some cases. You could travel through time and really go all the way back to, in this case, 1978. And we're very fortunate that someone recovered an old VHS tape of a very rare interview that Ginger Alden gave. She was the woman Elvis was, of course, engaged to at the time of his death. She was also the woman who found him on the bathroom floor. And she gives a really insightful and intriguing interview back in that time, right? Back in 1978, like less than a year after he's died. And that's really important. It's one thing to be a woman in Elvis's life, and the whole cultural fabric is altered, and standards have changed and perspectives have changed, and then to say what's appropriate in the new dispensation, completely different thing back then to simply say this or that. And then the other thing that's interesting is what she says in the interview compared to what she says in her memoir across the gulf of time. And that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to spend quite a lot of time with Ginger, and then certain amounts of time with the others. So among the insights that Ginger shares, she talks about Elvis being in a good mood and nervous because of a tour. So she's asked, like, the last day that you saw Elvis, what was going on? And he was in a good mood and nervous because of a tour. Already I'm wondering, what's Ginger holding back? Is she going to mention the book that had just come out like 4 days earlier, and that they were all worried about? Also, was Elvis in a good mood because he'd taken something? Is that going to be explicitly mentioned in this 13 minutes? Is she going to mention drugs or pills or anything? Does she take something as well? Is she going to mention that she takes something? Or are we going to get a vanilla version, right? And so she then takes us through her story. She says that some of it we know, some details we don't know. She says Elvis apparently asked Ginger at 4 a.m. if she wanted to play racquetball, and she said she did. And this is an image of Elvis's racquetball court. We call it a squash court. I'm not quite sure if squash and racquetball is the same thing, but it looks like a similar setup. But anyway, that's the court, and this is another view of it. I actually think this is a better view. You can see it's sort of got this glass partition. There's even sort of a lounge in this area. And there's the actual racket and ball, and there you have it. So after the first minute, Ginger kind of contradicts herself. So she sort of says, Elvis asked me, do you feel like playing racquetball? And she said, yes. And then she said, well, I didn't play racquetball. I sat behind the glass partition and he would do funny things, right? After playing racquetball for about 20 to 30 minutes, Elvis got onto a stationary bike and pedaled for about 3 minutes. This is the day that he died. This was August 16, 1977. And then she said, and then it was early morning and we were going to go back upstairs and he was going to go to sleep so we could get ready for his tour. And this is her sort of talking about it. Then, when asked about her last words to the king, Ginger says, looking down into the middle distance, well, he had tried to go to sleep. He had stood up one time and he had a book in his hand. She says it was a religious book, but she can't remember the name of it. And then he turned around and looked at me and he told me he was going into the bathroom to read. Now, not to put too fine a point on it, if he was taking a book to the loo, he expected to spend a long time there. Taking a book to the toilet kind of means I'm expecting to be there for a while. I kind of can feel something is on the cards, and so I'm going to be, I'm going to be indisposed for a while. So I'm going to take a book to pass the time. Also, the fact that he just exercised, right? He just exercised. Um, Even though he's just exercised, he's still constipated. He's played 20 minutes of racquetball. He's He's gone on an exercise bike for 3 minutes. Um, it says kind of a lot that after all that, he's still constipated. You've also got to wonder. Also, no goodnight kiss for his fiancée, no sex. So again, you kind of got to ask. This is an insight into the last moments that a woman shares with the king of rock and roll. Doesn't he kiss her goodnight? Don't they have sex in that last 24 hours? Doesn't the king of rock and roll, this sexy sex symbol, want to have sex with his beautiful fiancée? Doesn't seem that way. Instead, he's got like a long date with the toilet. Interestingly, in this video, she doesn't even mention at all that she said to him, don't fall asleep on the toilet. So remember, the guy's asking her, tell me about the last day. Well, she doesn't mention that at all. And she doesn't mention his last words to her, which are, well, I won't fall asleep. Instead, she just says, I stayed there. Meaning I stayed in Graceland. And then she smiles. She said, I'd fallen asleep there. You kind of get the feeling that she's kind of saying, I didn't mean to stay over, right? But I ended up falling asleep, and that's how I ended up staying there. She also doesn't explicitly say, I slept in Elvis's bed and he kind of got up out of bed. I was in his bedroom when she doesn't really say that, right? And you can tell that this is a true crime channel because we're kind of we're doing some statement analysis and we're kind of saying, what is she saying? You know what I mean? Obviously, she didn't commit any crime, so just bear that in mind. But nevertheless, it's interesting to think about that. So she says, I'd fallen asleep there. I was going to come home and get ready and pack to go on the tour. And then Ginger is asked, when did you see him next? Let's see if I can play this audio. So this question has to do with, I fell asleep, and then the question is, then when did you see him next? So let's go to that. Hopefully this works. It's not working so far. Just give me a second. So let's play this. Can you guys hear? It's actually, for some reason, it's not opening where I want it to open. That's not good. That's a bit of a surprise. So I thought this was a time-stamped. Thought this was time-stamped. No, it's not. Okay, so I'm not going to play that clip. I might play another one. Anyway, he asks, when did you see him next? And she says, that was when I walked in. I noticed, and then she cuts herself off, and she says, of course he'd been there for some time. And I thought, and that's unfortunately where the interviewer interrupts her. Now, just a tip to law enforcement and to anyone who's asking this kind of question. When you're dealing with finding someone who's perhaps died, and you're saying, what did you see? You don't give them 5 or 10 seconds and then interrupt them. You ask a question and you wait and you let them speak for as long as they want to, right? And even when they've stopped talking, you don't have to say anything, right? The worst thing you can do is the person's trying to offer their original version, whatever stands out in their minds. You don't interrupt that process. Obviously, this is not a true crime situation, but nevertheless, it's unfortunate that the guy does interrupt. So she says, that was when I walked in, I noticed. Then she cuts herself off and says, of course, he'd been there for some time. And I thought, now let me ask you. So it's at this point that the interviewer interrupts her. Let me ask you, why do you think she cuts herself off? And what do you think she does notice? Right? Why do you think she cuts herself off, and what do you think she notices? Gail, if you can, try not to write with all caps. We try not to do that on this channel. We also try and not have lots of exclamation marks. Terry Dean says, I'll join you in an hour if you're still here. Just popping in to give some love and a thumbs up. Thanks, Terry. See you later. 12th man says, I doubt very much that Elvis could have sex at the end of his life. Interesting. Beverly Lawyer, what has happened? So, wow, sorry to hear that, Beverly. So I wonder whether, so was that purely because of that, or was it because of constipation as well? What was the cause of death there, if you want to share? So Asda says rigor, John Amos says secret info, Nisi says drugs in the bathroom. Can I tell you what I think? I think when she says, that was when I walked in and I noticed, I think she noticed a smell. She could have said, she could also have just said what was kind of obvious. I noticed Elvis lying or sitting on the floor or sitting on the toilet. But you can kind of imagine that she's been told what she's not allowed to say. But I think she may have wanted to say, I noticed a smell. Like, as I opened the door, I noticed a smell. I think you would smell something in a situation like that, possibly before you'd even see something. And the fact that she says, I noticed, and then says, of course, he'd been there for some time, that seems to be a psychological link to smell, because they go together. Does that make sense? I'm just saying, does my thinking make sense to you? Does that way of thinking work in your mind? So at this point, unfortunately, the interview interrupts her and asked what time was it, and that's why she sort of looks up like that. That's remembering what time was it? And she says, this was 2:20, about 2:30. That's accurate. And she said, it must have been 6 hours, meaning it must have been 6 hours since I saw Elvis, right? And I've got a question, and the question is, Ginger, did you not notice anything in 6 hours? Right? It's almost like the John Benet Ramsey case. Something happens during the night, and Patsy, did you not notice anything? If you weren't writing the ransom note, were you sleeping soundly the whole time? John, did you sleep? And John's answer, as you guys know, is, well, he took an Ambien. So kind of, you also want to know, how did Ginger sleep through 6 hours of whatever Elvis was doing in the bathroom, right? And we are going to actually kind of get an answer to that, which is I think quite useful. Julie says everyone who was there was guarded about different aspects when they tell their memories. So that's why I kind of am saying, what is it like being with a sex symbol? And the answer is, well, you're going to end up keeping a lot of secrets. You can't tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You tell a sort of version of it, a selective version of it. So in other words, the fairy tale of a sex symbol is to some extent exactly that, a fairy tale. You tell the one side of the story. And then much later on, maybe you write tell all. Bridget says, you're right, it would have been an overwhelming smell. Stephanie says, I read an article that he often had to change clothes during his performance because he was leaking and having accidents. Not the sexiest thing you've ever seen. Gail says he was pronounced dead at 2:30. I think he was actually pronounced dead an hour later. I think they realized, or some realized, he was dead at 2:30, but he was pronounced dead officially, I think, at 3:30. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Nihu says, I'm sad he's gone, but I can't imagine him being 87 years old now. Okay, so let's go on. So she says, she's asked, were you shocked by what you saw? And she says, yes, and of course it was much worse because he'd been discussing the wedding plans that same morning, right? And that's really it. The interview doesn't press her. You can kind of imagine that she is quite uncomfortable, but the interviewer doesn't press her, asking instead what is going on in the house afterwards. So when she's asked, were you shocked? She just says yes, and then it sort of jumps away from that to the context. We were talking about our wedding, and so there's no real description from then on about what was going on. And so you can see why there would be still some mystery about what was really going on with Elvis. You can imagine in 1978 people wanting to believe he was still alive, and this particular interview giving some fuel to that idea, because it's like not very satisfying, not that it's not convincing, but it's kind of missing a lot of the detail that you would expect in a way. Anyway, so I do think Ginger's giving quite a lot away in the words when she says, when she's asked, were you shocked? And she says, yes, and of course it was much worse. That's the first part of the sentence. I think she's giving quite a lot away in those words. You can imagine a situation where you don't know where someone is and you open a door and your first sense of them is the strange smell, not a nice smell. and not just, that is a lot worse, right? And remember, let's just remind ourselves, she's not on trial. No one has committed a crime here, or if any did anything wrong, it was maybe Elvis's doctor. Perhaps his manager could have done a better job too. So we're not trying to put Ginger on trial. But when Ginger says it was much worse, I think what we know and what she knew, what we know and what she knew and saw was a heck of a lot worse. And not just because they discussed wedding plans. So I think that's not a kind of like a Freudian slip where you say what you're thinking. Well, you guess what? Things were a lot worse than you guys know. And then she brings it back to, what, it was worse because we were actually going to get married. You've got to wonder, is that the first thing she's thinking about? And it could be that she was thinking, well, we were going to get married and now that's gone. But I think the other thing is, if you're saying, what did you see when you entered that room? I don't know if you're going to be thinking we were going to get married. I think you're going to be saying, that's what I saw, that's what I smelled, that's what shocked me, kind of thing. Does that make sense? I don't think when someone says, in that situation, what did you perceive, you then go out of that situation into something else, unless you really don't want to talk about it. I think you naturally go into that situation. So if you just look at this interview in a general sense, she's prodded each step of the way, and it ends up being very vanilla in detail. And you might say it's rubbish, it's not worth anything. I don't think it is. I think it's very useful because of the timing of it. And I think it's very interesting because of what isn't revealed. So the details do eventually emerge many years later in her memoir. So you might say she couldn't have known those things anyway. Maybe she was sleepy, maybe this, maybe that. Well, it turns out she was holding something back because she wrote a memoir revealing these specific details many, many years later. So it wasn't as though she could remember them either. But it does make one wonder whether she's been sworn to secrecy. Has she been told to be discreet as possible? She's saying, I am giving this interview. Well, you can say that and that and that, right? She's been given instructions by Elvis's father, Vernon, who was still alive that year. Remember, he died the next year. And did the colonel talk to her? You can imagine that he did. Remember, the colonel is also going to kind of decide what she can get in the situation. And believe it or not, there definitely is that element here that her family stands to benefit after Elvis dies, but somebody's got to pull some of those strings. Well, in that sense, she's got to, play, I guess, by their rules, one would imagine. So as I say, what's fascinating in this interview wasn't so much what she says, but how much she doesn't say. There's no mention of a toilet or pills or a visit to the dentist or the book that was coming out or what Elvis was wearing or whether she tried to help or whether she called for an ambulance or that she did her makeup and phoned her mother just prior to finding him or that the bathroom door was slightly open. All of those, you'd think, essential elements just aren't in her story. And you kind of wonder, well, what is there? So quite ironically, it emerged in this interview that the officer who inducted Elvis into the military happened to be her father. Did you guys know that? Right? The officer who inducted Elvis into the military when Elvis was obviously very young was her father. That's kind of their common ground in a way, what they kind of had in common. And that kind of makes me wonder, how old was Ginger when that happened? Anyone know? Anyone know the answer to that? Does anyone know how old was Ginger when her father inducted Elvis into the military? I'm wondering whether to tell you or to sort of leave it as a reveal a little bit later on. 12th man says Ginger is 21 years younger. Okay, so Stephanie, let's hear the answer. Yeah, she was 5 years old. She met Elvis when she was 5 years old. I mean, Elvis was Elvis when she met him, but she was 5 years old. It reminds me a little bit of the Thornbirds. I don't know if you guys know that story. Yeah, but 5 years, yeah. 5 years old, that's how old she was. That is very young. That is very young. So let's continue. So I think I can play this. She's also asked, what is a date with Elvis Presley like? So let's see if we can play that. Let's see if it comes up.
Well, very different. I went up to see him, and he would tell me that his Ferrari, his car that he had. And then he asked me if I would like to go for a ride in his Blackhawk. And I said, yes. And then after a while, he said to go on a ride in a small plane that I can jet saw around the city.
So you probably couldn't make too much of that out, but let me read the transcript. So she's asked, you can kind of tell from the tone of her voice how young she is, and a little bit of the spirit that she has. She's asked, what's the date with Elvis Presley like? And then she smiles and she says, well, it's very different, which is already an admission that it's not necessarily amazing. It's kind of weird, right? But it's also, she's been quite discreet. So she says, well, I went to see him and he'd been telling me about his Ferrari. And then he asked me if I'd like to go for a ride in his Black Hawk. Now, I've got to say, I don't quite understand her response to the question. If you think about it, you say, what's a date with Elvis like? You would imagine you'd say, well, okay, I'll tell you about this date. He called me up and then we met and X, Y, Z. What she doesn't really disclose there is how they are connected or how they're brought together. She simply says, well, I went to see him. And I think what is sort of coming through there is she had known him. Because she, how can I put it? She didn't just meet him one day. She'd kind of known him for kind of a long time, if you know what I mean. I don't mean years and years and years. I just mean she'd been in the sort of periphery for some time. And then at some point, obviously, he said, you want to go for a drive in my Ferrari? And we don't know at what point this was either. She doesn't give a time either. And it's quite interesting how she sort of makes it all about these expensive items, this car, and then that jet. And it kind of makes you think, was that so? And it makes you think in general, what attracts you to a sex symbol? The sex symbol, the high regard or the psycho fancy that everyone else has for that person, or the toys, the cars, the islands, the hotels, the lifestyle. What actually attracts you? The person who may be flatulent and overweight and keeps terrible hours, or is it the whole thing of, well, I'm Elvis's girlfriend? What is the actual thing, right? And then she says he offered to take me for a flip in his plane, the Lockheed Jetstone, and this obviously was a big deal to her in pre 1978. Somebody who owns their own plane, and I think anybody who owns their own plane is going to be quite a fascinating person. I mean, how many people do you know who've got those kind of resources that they own their own plane? And then she says, the plane was just beautiful when I first saw it because I'd never seen anything like that. And the pilot was very nice. So I'll play that. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it.
the plane was just beautiful when I first saw it because I'd never seen anything like that. And the pilot model house is very, very nice.
So I can tell that it just probably doesn't sound as clear, but again, you get a sense of what's going on. And then instead of going for a spin around Memphis, Elvis said he'll be back in a minute, drove home to Graceland, collected pajamas for everyone, and said they were going to Vegas. Ginger decided to call her mom and let her know afterwards. I don't know why, but the story just feels a bit weird. It's like they all go to his aeroplane, then Elvis himself leaves the aeroplane, goes home to Graceland, gets pajamas for everyone. You kind of got to wonder, are her pajamas in Graceland, and why must he personally go and do that? Anyway, and then she also says Ginger says she decided to call her mom and let her know afterwards. And you've also got to think of it in a sense of both. She's a very young girl. I don't know if she was engaged at this point, probably not. Now she's going with Elvis somewhere else. Shouldn't she ask her parents for their permission? And I'm not being stupid, like don't go first, ask your parents for it. I'm just saying that that is probably a very likely scenario, right? But the other side of it is you've also got to think at this point she's still 22 maybe, and now she must find another husband in the society. And isn't that society going to judge her and say, did you just go off with this person to Vegas? And just like almost what would parents think of that? And this is, I'm talking about the culture in the 70s, and also in Tennessee. Are they going to frown on this young woman who is whatever, right? I'm just saying, is she thinking about that in terms of giving her answer? So that's why I feel like it sort of feels like Ginger's trading the fine line between impressing her peers. I went with Elvis, wah, 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 but also not quite telling the old fogies who are also watching the gory details, because I'm sure she could tell a lot more. When you were on the aeroplane, did you just sit there and look out the window? Remember, this was the 70s in Tennessee, right? And it's within that context that I think she's also kind of wary. Again, also in Ginger's story, what did they do in Vegas? She says they all just slept. So it seems like much ado about nothing. They go to all the effort to go to Vegas, and then they all just slept. Didn't they do anything else? Is that all? She says they were all tired from the trip, but I mean, they flew there. So I think another thing you could ask is, if they were tired from the trip, what were they doing on the airplane between A and B? It just leaves a lot to the imagination, right? Now I'm going to play, and again, you might not be able to hear it very well. Ginger's asked, when Elvis proposed, how did he do it? Right? So listen, see if you can hear this.
It was on January the 26th when I came, and I did it at Graceland. And it was in the other room. He always had things going on around me that I never knew about. And he took my hand and took me into the lounge area of the session, and I sat down in the black chair, and he got down to me.
So she's kind of gushing, and she's saying it was all so beautiful. Now, call me a killjoy, but the king of rock and roll proposing to the love of his life next to a toilet. He proposes to her not on his jet, not in Vegas, not out of all the places he could. He proposes in a bathroom next to the toilet. I don't like kind of get butterflies flying in formation when I think of that. But that's just me. Maybe as a guy, I think I wouldn't do that. But maybe if you a sex god, you can do no wrong. You can find the most unromantic place, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of that? If Elvis proposed to you in a toilet, would you be like, wow, that was incredibly beautiful? So what I like about my analysis, or the analysis, that sounds a bit narcissistic and self-congratulating, but what I like about the way that the analysis is done is you get this very generic vanilla version, and then I right next to it put this really detailed version that comes out years and years later. We're about to get to that. Tommy says he had a huge airplane also and could live in it. True Jedi Forever says it's things like that that make me think there was more drug use going on with everyone in his story. A lot of you are saying, no, I wouldn't want to be proposed to in a, next to a toilet. So we're about halfway through analyzing that 13-minute interview, and we're going to come back to it. But first, let's look at an August 2014 article, so jumping quite a few years into the future. And it's from the Daily Mail, and this suggests that the fairy tale wasn't quite all that it seemed. And I want to show you the article. It's this article. And there it says in the article, Elvis hit her once, hurled a dish of ice cream when she mocked his weight, and made her aroused but anxious. So that's the, I don't know whether one wants to say dark side, but that's certainly the other side of the fairy tale. And here's a link to that article if you want to read it. So let me just bring it back here. So the article reveals another detail about Ginger discovering Elvis on the bathroom floor that we haven't actually even dealt with in terms of when we did the last 24 hours. So listen to this. I slapped him a few times, and it was like he breathed once when I turned his head. I didn't want to think he was dead. God wouldn't want to take him so soon. But the words that stand out there is that when she finds Elvis, she actually slaps him, right? She slaps him. Now, what do you think that means? Do you think she's cross with him? I don't think so. Or do you think she's aware that whatever state he's in is very, very serious? Because you tend to, someone has drowned, for example, and they're in a serious state of their life is being lost. You might slap them or even hit them on the chest to try and, in a way, shock them back into consciousness. So do you agree that slapping him is actually a sort of admission that she's very clear that something very, very bad has happened, that she's almost at the point of like he's dead. She's trying to almost like resurrect him by slapping him, not like touching him gently. Yeah, I don't want to believe it. That's a really great way of saying it. She probably thought he was heavily sedated, at least. Yeah. And so that slapping is really giving away, I think, that thought, that knowledge. Interesting, isn't it? Then she says she pressed the intercom in the bedroom at Graceland that rang in the kitchen and called for help. That's also giving us very clearly her location, how she communicates. She doesn't like run down the stairs. And she says Elvis has fainted, or she screams Elvis has fainted. And I don't see anything wrong with it. I think she probably did think that he was unconscious and very frightened that it could be worse. I think that that's the case. Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Sorry, I wanted to highlight that one. Yvonne says, yes, she panicked. You must remember she's a young woman, and she's probably never seen or been in the situation before. So you can understand that she's what's the word? Doesn't know really what to do in the situation. Jody says she knew he was overloaded with drugs. I think that's fairly reasonable to speculate on. I think you could imagine and so someone in that situation, you would imagine you would slap and you would, like, wake up, and you want to try and reverse whatever, state they're in as quickly as possible. Yeah, that's also a good point. 12th man says, I remember one of the mafia men said that Ginger knew she was never to fall asleep and leave Elvis alone in the bathroom. I didn't actually know that. That's quite interesting. So the article goes on to say, quote, Elvis's old army buddy and helpmate, Joe Esposito, and by the way, he wrote a book as well, ran up the stairs, rolled Elvis over, and pounded on his chest to try to get him breathing. So that's exactly what you're talking about. Joe pounding on Elvis's chest is the male version, I guess, of her slapping him. It's the same thing. We've got to wake you up. You have sunk into a deep state of unconsciousness, and we've got to bring you back. And then the article states here, this is from 2014, Elvis had died of polypharmacy, the use of multiple medications that are clinically unnecessary, in his bathroom at Graceland, end quote. It's really interesting that in this description, Elvis's death is entirely drug related. Now, if you think about on the day that he died later on, they would say it's totally drugs have got nothing to do with it. This article, so many years later, says it's entirely drug related, which I think is a little bit simplistic. I think it's true, but it's not the full story. I don't think polypharmacy is the full story. There's no mention of a heart attack in this story. There's no mention of constipation in this story. Of course, this story is not to dive totally into the circumstances of his death, but nevertheless, it's not there. This is why you've got to be careful with mainstream media. They are trying to do their job. They're trying to give you some information, but it's not their job to tell you the whole story. You might imagine that it is. The point of this magazine, the point of this article was kind of to say, Ginger has revealed some shocking details. That's the point of the article, and that's what they succeed in doing. It's not to kind of reinvestigate everything. And you might say, actually, it is. The journalist should. Well, that journalist got to go and write lots of other articles. And if they did that kind of analysis every time, the output would be whatever, 1/10. And you might not like that, but that's the reality of that. The same thing applies to lawyers pleading cases in court. They don't only have one case. And that's a big difference between, for example, what I do in true crime. I will cover one case for weeks, months, sometimes even years, but typically months at a time. And I have the luxury to do that, but lawyers in the real world don't. The police in the real world don't. The police can't just study one file. They've got to study that while looking at all these other things. And you might think, wow, I can't believe that person didn't see that. Because they've got all these because other crimes are happening as well, because other stories are happening as well. So that's why it's not some kind of conspiracy or agenda that there's fake news. It's just that's how human beings are. They're limited in what they can do. It's not their job to solve the mystery of what happened to Elvis in every single article that they write. But by the same token, it can lead ordinary members of the public to start making assumptions, and for those assumptions to become conspiracies and not necessarily true, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying? So what's also interesting is how the article segues right here to another biography. So it's talking about what almost said Amber, what Ginger is saying, right? In terms of her own memoir, her own story, and then it segues to a completely different author, Alana Nash. By the way, her name is misspelled in this article. Once again, you might say, "Oh no, the what kind of what person wrote this article? You can't even get the person's name right." Well, he got the name, but again, it's human beings who are doing this, right? Um, and so now it's going to another source for her story that she doesn't give herself in 2014. And this is a quote, I think, from Alana Nash's well documented biography, Baby, Let's Play a House, right? There's a quote from that. Quote, his swollen face was buried in the red shag carpet, his tongue nearly bitten in half, protruding from clenched teeth. I've got to say, I didn't quite know what to make of Nash's version. She wasn't there on the one hand. It could be true what she's saying. It could be that she's spoken to people or spoken to people who've spoken to people who were there. And so she does have the inside track. It's hard to know whether it's the sensationalization, the tabloid version of what did happen. So when she says, his face was buried in the red shag carpet, that may be true. I don't know whether it's true that his tongue was nearly bitten in half. That to me seems an exaggeration, but maybe it isn't. But if it is true, it kind of makes you think that he was in anguish, that it wasn't a sudden, he didn't just die like that, that he was in a you can almost feel that sense of horrible constipation that he can't overcome because of the situation that he's in. Goes on to say here, she first met the king when she was 5 years old. There's the confirmation. And her father was a public relations officer in the army. Now there's the other side. Her own father is a public relations guy, so her own father will be, you can imagine her father, after Elvis dies, isn't her father going to be giving her advice on public relations and what to say and all the rest? Nash writes in her book, his beautiful skin now mottled purple black. Now, like I say, I don't know what to make of Nash's version, because that, for example, seems, how can I put it? So do you think Elvis had beautiful skin when he was 42 years old and sort of bloated? I mean, you saw his skin during his last performances. He's sort of sweating. Does he really, like, this is not the Elvis of Heartbreak Hotel, and this is not the slick sex god that he was once upon a time. So I don't know whether one can say his beautiful skin now mottled purple black. It's good. It sort of plays well, but is it strictly speaking accurate? You get what I'm saying? That's the other side, is if it's true that the skin of his face is mottled purple black, well, then he'd obviously been lying there for a long time, and you can imagine what the smell was like in this room. Then she also writes, he vomited and crawled a few feet before he died. It was not a painless death. So I would love to know whether that's true, and if it is true, how does she know that? Because what the impressions we've already been given, and maybe that's all they are that Elvis was on the toilet, basically, that he didn't crawl anywhere. He wasn't lying on the ground, only a part of his body was on the ground. Now, this is giving us a totally different thing, that he crawled a few feet. If he crawled a few feet, then his feet couldn't be in the air, his bum couldn't be in the air, the pajama top couldn't have slid down. So now you're kind of back to square one. What can you rely on here? Does that make sense? And this is where that whole crime scene thing comes in, where you've got to start actually paying attention to detail. You've got to pay attention to what you know. Stephanie says, vomited the stain on the carpet. That's the question. Let's see what some of you guys are saying. Yeah, it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. So as I say, it's difficult to know what to make of Nash's version. On the one hand, it could be true. She did, I think, write for the New York Times and other pretty credible publications. Perhaps this, perhaps this persistent investigative journalist found stuff out that nobody else did. Lord knows that she went beyond the borders even of America. She went to the Netherlands, met the colonel's family. So she certainly put in the effort. She certainly put in the hard yards. On the other hand, some of what she writes sounds a little bit over dramatic. If you say, you know what, I think she's right. I think this version is the unadulterated truth. So if you accept that, then you say, okay, so if Elvis's death wasn't painless, right? If Elvis's death wasn't painless, well, then it was painful. And if it wasn't instant, then why didn't Ginger hear him? Didn't he cry out? Didn't he, if he was crawling, didn't he hit on the door? Didn't he make some sort of sound while he was in this clear distress? If he vomited, didn't anyone hear that? Vomiting is usually not a quiet sound either. So I think that is a very important question from an investigator point of view, is if all of that's true, why didn't Ginger hear him? And I don't think it's a rhetorical. I don't think it's, well, none of that's true. The answer could be she didn't hear him legitimately because she also took something to help her sleep, right? And maybe you don't want to go into that whole area of Elvis died because he took something to sleep, and I took something to sleep, and I maybe should have prevented Elvis from doing that, because I'm doing the same thing. You don't want to have that conversation. If she needed a downer, right, hadn't she taken an upper too? So her interview in 1978 simply provides no clues either way. That's the thing I'm trying to stress here. On the one hand, you look at it in isolation and it feels like something's missing. Well, now you can see how much is missing. But she may have been told, don't go there. And so given that a memoir is a very different animal, chock full of gory details, one has the impression that not saying too much was all part of the plan, right? Well, it's terrible how terrible this audio is. Really not cool. It would be nice just to play some of the audio, but it just comes out kind of in a garbled way. So going back to the article, if Elvis had called out, Ginger likely would have not heard him. That's what Nash wrote. Elvis had called nurse Tish Henley, who worked for his personal doctor on site, George Nicopolis, also known as Dr. Nick. So this is the critical insight here. He'd asked her to bring up something to help Ginger sleep. Do you guys see that we're getting a bit of an insight into his final moments, that in his final moments, he asks the nurse, and we know that the nurse didn't want to give him any more medication. Now the question is, nurse, my fiancée can't sleep, will you help her? It's not for me, it's for her. John says, massive heart attack, you simply fall, not crawl about. Elizabeth Makepeace says, yes, he definitely would have vomited, most likely at the moment of death, and would have, okay. Right, so can you see here that how, what's the word, how relevant, significant, important ginger is to the very last thing that Elvis ever does. One of the last things Elvis does is he calls the nurse and says, can you bring up one last pill, one last medication for Ginger? The article goes on to say, Nash reports that Henley insisted she sent up one diluted pill, a strong opiate, stronger than Ginger would actually require for the menstrual cramps she said she was suffering. So guess what? The very last chemical thingamajig, the very last substance that's sent up to the bedroom is a strong opiate. And isn't that the straw that breaks the camel's back? Does Ginger ultimately take it? Is that why she sleeps so soundly? Or does Elvis take it? Does Elvis give her some of his medication and he takes the opiate? What do you think the answer is? So I think there are a couple of possibilities here, that both Elvis and Ginger couldn't sleep, or that Elvis couldn't sleep but had used up his drugstore credit for that day with all the drug suppliers around him, and he sort of needed a different angle. Or that Ginger genuinely couldn't sleep and that the pill she took is the reason she did sleep so well. It's also interesting that it's specified that one pill was sent for Ginger, not Elvis. They didn't say they sent up 3 pills or 5 or 2, just one, and it's for Ginger. You can imagine that if that last pill was sent up and Elvis took it, someone would potentially have hell to pay. You knew Elvis was taking so much medication. How could you let him take it? Ginger, how could you let Elvis take that? Oh, no, I took it myself. Did Ginger end up giving Elvis her pill? That's the question. So remember my question, which person in the story could have or should have or had the potential ability to save Elvis, right? Think about that with relation to Ginger and this particular scenario, right? Do you see how, as we've revisited this, this was a totally indirect way. When I was like, I want to study the woman in his life, it wasn't like I want to go through the bathroom thing again. I just happened to stumble on this by a different source, right? But you see how every successive flyby, you get to stick another needle into another part of the body of the story, and it reveals another perspective. By the way, I went to the physio again today, and I specifically said, can you please not stick any needles into me? And so she didn't. And she said, one of the reasons you are struggling with spasms, and I think it shouldn't be rocket science, shouldn't have been a big surprise, is she says, you're sitting too much. You're sitting too much. So I'm going to try and not have 3-hour lives from now. Try and cut down to 2.5 hours, 2 hours or whatever. So I'm afraid that diagnosis is going to affect you guys, right? So we're already at 1 hour and 20. I'm going to try not to do much more than an hour from now. The analysis on Ginger is the longest of the 10. So so we'll see how far we go. So what do you guys think? Did Ginger end up giving Elvis her pill? The article goes on to say, quote, Alden was 2 decades younger than Elvis and 20 at the time when she got caught up in life at Graceland, and he began showering her with presents, jewels, 3 cars, including a Lincoln Continental. So when she talks about He took her for a drive in the Ferrari, and then in this, and then in the jet. You can tell that she's, I don't want to say materialistic, but she's certainly, that catches her attention. And so the fact that the king gives her 3 cars, including a Lincoln Continental, obviously cars were something that got her heart fluttering, right? He also gave her furs and made promises that he ultimately couldn't keep because he died. Then the article goes on to say that Nash writes that Alden was actually a reluctant girlfriend. And that's where you come back to this whole idea, is a sex god really so sexy? Susan says, I'm on a tablet and I've got to get up and move at times. Tommy says, I think Elvis was very generous. But imagine that. Imagine you are talking about the king of rock and roll. You are also talking about a sex god or whatever. But think about what you're actually talking about. You're talking, despite all of that, despite all the excess, despite all the money, despite all the adulation, you're talking about a 40-year-old fat guy with a 20-year-old who met him when she was 5 years old, right? And this 20-year-old is being given 3 cars and furs and jet rides in jet planes and trips to Vegas, right? And think about, despite all of that, she's still a kind of a reluctant girlfriend. Why would she be reluctant? I think there are a couple of reasons. One is, would you want a boyfriend who's like a vampire, is sort of only up, he sleeps in the day and is awake at night? Would you want a boyfriend who drinks, I don't know what it is, 3 suitcases worth of drugs a month or whatever it is? I don't know what the actual thing is, but would you want a boyfriend who, let's just say, is absolutely amazing guy, is such a nice guy, but he consumes 3 suitcases worth of drugs a month? Would that sort of be, it's a bit of a deal breaker? Would you want a boyfriend who always has 10 dudes running around, like near him? Would you want a boyfriend who opens the gates to his home to 100 women once a week? Would you want a boyfriend who has slept with a lot of other people? Just that, like, you handsome, you awesome, you so romantic, you whatever, got great skin, but you've slept with a heck of a lot of people. Would that bother you, right? So this idea that she was a reluctant girlfriend, I don't think is that strange, because we just haven't thought about it very much. And according to Nash, Ginger was put off by his drug use, and she was still involved with a boyfriend in Memphis. So as amazing as Elvis was, as amazing as his legacy was and everything, here she is with him, and she's not really enjoying the drug use. Who would? I'm talking about to that extent. And she's kind of still got a boyfriend in Memphis, right? And you can imagine maybe the boyfriend is 25 years old, Elvis is 42. Everyone may think Elvis is so amazing and so hot, but maybe her boyfriend actually is, is not fat, is sleeps at night. You know what I mean? Maybe that actually is a better situation. So then you kind of got to ask yourself, if she doesn't actually want to be with Elvis, why is she with Elvis? If you just accept that, you say, it's actually not that much fun, and this, that, and the next thing. So why is she with him? What's actually going on? And here's the answer. So, you talk about which woman could have saved him, what is actually going on with this woman. Well, it's a woman who's apparently pushing Ginger to be with Elvis. Guess who that woman is? Joe Laverne Alden. Ginger's mother. It's Ginger's mother who's saying, daughter, you need to be his girlfriend. Don't be, don't kick your boyfriend to the curb. I want you to be with Elvis. And her mother was a serious Elvis fan. And obviously, if her daughter is at Graceland, then the mother can be there as well. Obviously, if her daughter rubs shoulders with Elvis, so can she, right? So who would have imagined that? Who would imagine that the real what's the word? The reality in the situation is that her mother has sort of pushed her into the situation. It's quite incredible, isn't it? Tommy says, I'm not surprised. So this article goes on to say, quote, Joe, meaning her mother, Ginger's mother, Joe had taken her little girl to Graceland to peer through the big iron gates. She was such an Elvis fan. So again, you're getting the sense that Ginger didn't just meet Elvis one day. It wasn't just an innocent date. It wasn't just Elvis spotted her in a crowd. It feels like there was a bit of a design going on here, doesn't it? There was a bit of an agenda. Her mother is a huge fan, and her mother can use her daughter or broker or whatever, and doesn't it work in the end? I mean, ultimately, Elvis becomes engaged to her. So Yared goes on. The article says, quote, to motivate Ginger to accompany him on tour, Elvis even promised to pay for landscaping at her mother's house as well as pay off her mortgage. Now, if you think about that, it's like to motivate Ginger, he's now doing something for her mother. So you kind of get the idea that this is being arranged between Elvis and Ginger's mother. Do you get that? I mean, is Ginger at 20 years of age, or perhaps even younger, is she going to care about landscaping? Is she going to care about her mother's garden? Is she going to care about her parents' mortgage? And so, I don't know, I find it almost sinister, this kind of transaction between Elvis and Ginger's mother, right? If it's true, I mean, this what seems to be what is being suggested by Nash, if it's true, and certainly by this article. So, again, you wonder, is this true? Is what is the real story here? But rather than saying, is the boogeyman in the story, Elvis should have saved himself or whatever, are there certain people in the story that are pressing in and manipulating things that really shouldn't have? Can you imagine if Ginger wasn't pushed to be with Elvis? Well, then she wouldn't have been. Then someone else would have been who maybe loved him in a different way and maybe was closer in age to him and was like more mature to say, you're not going to do this. Because in a way, you've got to wonder, is Ginger doing what her mother's telling her to do? What is the real kind of motive, or what's the real thing that's going on here, right? I do think money plays a big role in this whole story. It's the story of the Colonel, but you can see that Elvis being generous maybe isn't just Elvis being a nice guy. So anyway, it goes on to say that payout, in other words, Elvis promising to pay off the mortgage, would become a court issue after Elvis's death. She would actually sue Elvis's estate, the mother that had so adored and obsessed, this big fan of Elvis, would later take the Elvis estate to court after he died, and she would win. And so now the article reverts to Ginger. In her memoir, Ginger reveals Elvis hit her once and apologized. So you can kind of imagine in a situation. And again, I think you've got to just acknowledge that we don't know everything for a fact, but let's assume that that's true, and let's assume that the the scenario is also true. The scenario of a overly obsessive mother and an overly pushy mother, and all of this, right? All of this intrigue. You can imagine it's not it's not the way, it's not a proper love story. It's not the way that you would imagine a fairy tale romance would take place, with mommy getting landscaping done and whatnot, right? And so, in a situation like that, that's not authentic. A situation like that where someone's actually got a boyfriend and there's this big age gap, and I'm not crazy about much drugs you're taking, and my favorite characters aren't vampires, kind of thing. I like walking around in the day. And the other thing is, um, there's another young person in that house as well, Lisa Marie, and you think, wow, I'm not really that much older than your daughter, kind of thing. Although a couple of years older she was, but and then you think, could there be times where that lack of an authentic relationship shines through, where she's not terribly happy with Elvis taking drugs, and she wouldn't really want to be in a relationship with him, but she's kind of going along with it. And then at one point she actually tells him, you know what, I'm tired of you taking drugs. She kind of crosses that line. And then what does Elvis do? Yeah. What does Elvis do? He gets upset. What do you mean I can't take drugs? Who do you think you are telling me what I can do and what I can't do? And yeah, there's a bit of a Deb versus Heard echo, isn't there? And so what happens when Elvis is told, you fat? And isn't that what Johnny Depp was told? You old and you fat and whatever. Isn't that what Elvis was told? And what does it feel like when the king of rock and roll, and some, um, I don't know, unknown young person tells it like it is? The truth hurts, doesn't it? And so she says in her memoir that Elvis hit her once, maybe hit her more than once, but she admits that he hit her at least once, and then he apologized. Didn't Johnny also apologize? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm effing savage. I'll never ever do it again. Um, Also, that he shot off firearms at a television set. Now, you've also got to ask, somebody does that. Have you ever fired a gun at a television in your life? Have you ever fired a gun inside uh, a room or a hotel in your life? So somebody does that. What do you think's going on with him? Do you think there's turmoil? Do you think there's like a crazy substances are playing out in the background, or it's just something that randomly happened? Elvis shooting off firearms at a television set and a telephone reminds me of the Deb finger incident. It's something that most people wouldn't really happen to, because yeah, just wouldn't happen unless you were very, having these big parties all the time. Apparently, Elvis also threw a dish of ice cream. I'm not sure who he threw it at, but he threw a dish of ice cream when she spoke to him about calories and being fat. He didn't like to hear that. That's not the nice Elvis. That's not the fairy tale of being with a sex god. And apparently, he always apologized for his passive aggressive behavior um, when he didn't get his way. Sound familiar? Or is Ginger, um, you know, is Ginger like somebody else that everybody hates right now? Is this a familiar pattern, or is Ginger just absolutely not believable? What do you guys think? I just think it's a very interesting intertextuality I definitely find it quite interesting. So also an interesting comment in the first video where Ginger says he always had things going on around me that I never knew about. I think that's just, there's a lot of truth in that sort of flippant comment, and it's one that she made in 1978. He always had things going on around me that I never knew about. Ginger also describes Elvis wanting Ginger to get married in glass slippers and a tiara in the wedding of the century, like Cinderella. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, interestingly, at the time this interview was conducted in 1978, the time that you see Ginger here, Ginger's mother was filing a suit against the Presley estate for $40,000, demanding money to pay mortgage fees. Elvis gave Ginger's folks a home with a swimming pool, and a year later, they were asking that he pay all outstanding bills. So that's one of these 10 women we're going to deal with. We won't deal with the rest in such a detailed way. But the next one we're going to deal with is Linda Thompson. And it was actually Linda Thompson who gave me the idea of doing this because I was so charmed by her. I thought she's attractive, interesting, intelligent, and she was interviewed on Larry King. And I just thought she gave a really great, uh, compared to Ginger, she gives a very interesting story about Elvis, totally different in her own way. And so Linda is kind of a self-made woman. She's an Oscar and Grammy nominated songwriter. She's the ex-wife of Bruce Jenner. Don't know if you guys know that. She also won Miss Tennessee, and she was the girlfriend of Elvis Presley. 25 years after Presley's death, Linda went on to Larry King to share her story. So this is another picture of her on Elvis's jet, and at this point, I think she's 22 or 23 years old, and Elvis is about mid-30s, about 15 years older than her. You guys notice another pattern here. So Larry King's first question to Linda is, so you were how old when you met Elvis? And Linda responds automatically. This is from CNN, from Larry King. Let's see if I can play it.
You know that Elvis liked them young, so I was very young. But I was 22. I had just turned 22. But chronologically, I was older than I was emotionally.
So again, I don't know if you can hear that, but she says, Elvis liked them young. So I was very young. I just turned 22. Elvis was actually 36 at the time. So I don't know if you're noticing this, but it does come up quite often. There's a big age gap, right? She says, I was Miss Tennessee in 1972 and Elvis was Elvis. And I was invited to go to the Memphian Theater, which he rented out after midnight to screen films. Linda explains how during I think it's the Miss USA pageant, herself and Miss Rhode Island were invited to watch movies with Elvis. And she said it was like, hello, this is Miss Tennessee. And then he said, honey, where have you been all my life? Linda says she was standoffish because she didn't know whether Elvis was married or not. He'd separated from Priscilla in December or January 1972 and met Linda in July of the same year. She describes him as smitten. Now, the reality is that Priscilla and Elvis only officially divorced in 1973. So I think technically he was married. I mean, aren't you married until you get divorced? She's saying that actually he wasn't married because they'd been separated for 6 months, right? So let me see if I can play that part.
And he's been separated since December, January. but I didn't know. It hadn't been released to the press. So I was pretty standoffish because
So she says she was standoffish, but to jump the gun, she does end up kissing him on that very first date. So it's like, I think you're married, I'm standoffish, but anyway, let's kiss anyway. Um, she says that how it happened was he came and sat next to me in the movie and plopped down next to me. She said Elvis pulled the old yawn and sort of stretched his arm over the back of the seat next to her. And she said, finally, during one of his nuzzles, said, honey, you know I'm not married anymore. Now, you've also kind of got to ask, aren't you? Aren't you married? I mean, you actually only divorced the next year. Is that actually true? Is he telling the truth? Um, and then she said to him, oh, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you, but you should have married a Southern girl. And obviously, she's a Southern girl. And then she says, he always remembered my saying that. And so they really hit it off. She describes Elvis as very Southern and then that they had an immediate kinship. So, so she was immediately standoffish, but they had an immediate kinship. So let me ask you guys, was Elvis the Pelvis very Southern? Is there anyone here that is from the South? Is there anyone here that is um, from Tennessee or from Memphis? Would you describe the personality of Elvis as very Southern? Yvonne says he certainly didn't seem shy with Linda. So I don't know about you, that is Elvis, and you might say, well, Elvis is Elvis, but if you imagined it was anyone else, you'd say, what's that pudgy, porky guy doing with that young hottie? Or I'll put another way, what's that young hottie doing with that sort of, you know, um, sleepy looking older dude? Tommy says, yeah, it doesn't seem Southern. I would imagine some of the, and I'm not American, so you know, you might say you don't know what you're talking about, and maybe I don't, but I'm saying I would imagine qualities, the Southern qualities are being conservative to some extent, being traditional, being sort of, you know, like you you don't have how can I put it? You you are quite moral. You are aware that God exists, and you don't have extramarital relationships, for example. You are not. You might wear like a cowboy hat, but you're not going to sort of wear um, a glittering costume. In other words, it's just quite conservative. Now, would you say that Elvis is conservative? KD says his diet was definitely Southern. Yeah, well, that's true. Beverly says he was wacky. Would you say that as a woman you would look at Elvis and say, well, you are very Southern. You've got that Southern personality. When she describes how Elvis got her number, I really like this part. Makes me really like her. She says she made him do all the work. Now, elsewhere in the interview, she says that she was 22 years old going on 13. She was very naive, but that's definitely not a 13-year-old at work there, you know, like getting him to get her number. That's definitely something else. But it worked because Elvis called her bright and early at 4 a.m. the next morning. And so it's like, it's not like, um, and her mother answers the phone. It's not like a situation of, this is totally unacceptable. This old dude calling you at and he doesn't even know you at 4 o'clock in the morning, never ever call you again. Instead, it's, oh, it's Elvis. Oh my God, wow, 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 right? And so after the movie date, Linda goes over to Graceland the next day. Now, I must say, when she tells the story, it sounds really romantic and she sounds really nice, and so does he. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is it all it's cracked up to be? After being pressed, Linda says Elvis kissed her that first night in the movie theater, and then the two dated for more than 4 years. What was that like? What was it like dating Elvis for 4 years? Was she the only girl for him? And so now I'm gonna just put a link to, if you guys want to just look at some other photos of Linda with Elvis. You can have a look at that link. I'll put some of them here, but here is one more that you can look at. So here she's a brunette. And here's another one. You can see he's going into that sturdier phase kind of thing. There you can still see she's quite a lot younger. Okay, so who are we going to look at next? Yeah, it's this lady. So are you guys aware of these photos? Have any of you seen these photos where Elvis is about to kiss a woman? Any of you seen those photos? That's something that is quite strange. So again, you must ask: is Elvis a typical Southern dude? Is he what's the word? Is he shy? And this is a situation where a woman called Barbara Gray, now her identity only came out much, much later, right? Her identity only came out much later that this is her name, but she was kind of like this mysterious, anonymous woman that Elvis kisses outside the concert. The part that I find personally quite weird is that while all of this is happening, they're being photographed. And they know they're being photographed because it's a photographer that was hired by RCA Records. So you kind of get the idea that they are kissing for photos and that it's totally manufactured. It's totally, what's the word? Well, it's not completely impulsive, but the fact that there's a photographer there means it's not quite as sweet and romantic as you would perhaps want it to be. Imagine if you wanted to kiss Elvis and he said, that's fine, but just look, the camera's over there. Okay, now are you ready? You know, that wouldn't be as memorable, would it? So here's another picture of Barbara Gray. And these pictures caused a sensation. Here's another one. And bear in mind, this isn't just a picture of Elvis and Barbara, this guy to get up the stairs, get this angle, and they do kind of both pretend to be ignoring him. And some of these photos come from Vanity Fair. So there's the stairway that he was on over there to get that view from above. Now he's off the stairs. There you can see the stairs in the background. Now he's right beside them, shooting from sort of the waist up. Not quite shooting from the hip, but you get what I'm saying. So is being with a sex symbol all it's cracked up to be? So many years later, when Barbara was a much older lady, she described the date where she was photographed by Elvis's record company. She said Elvis kept trying to kiss her and she kept turning away. So once again, you've kind of got this thing of the sex god, the king of rock and roll, but the women are kind of like pushing him away. I'm just saying this is kind of gives another side to it. And these photos were described as shockingly provocative for its time. It was like, well, this is I'm not sure if it was the 50s. I think it was the 50s. Wow, look at what he's doing. This is shockingly provocative. And that's where you kind of got to ask, is Elvis really shy? He's doing this in front of a cameraman with a girl and arguably for the camera. Is he shy? And the other side to this, which is quite funny, is that Barbara didn't tell Elvis she had a boyfriend in Philadelphia. So she is actually like, Elvis, you're cool, but I've kind of got other plans. Sorry, Elvis. The irony is that today she thinks like, wow, I wish I didn't go with Elvis. So she actually kind of dumped Elvis. Elvis asked her to go with her, and then she didn't. She went kind of to her boyfriend. If you're interested in this story, you can go to Vanity Fair. It's at that link. Elise says, yes, I'm from Memphis. So do you think of Elvis as a Southern guy? I suppose that's quite a hard question because, first of all, he is, and second of all, he's part of Southern culture. But does he, like, if you think about other Southern men in your orbit, are they Elvis-like? I guess. Kathy says, young hottie sounds funny to me. Okay. Julie, yeah, that's a really interesting point. Julie says, I think his food hunger was due to an emotional hole, but also because of his childhood poverty. He knew what it was to not have enough. Yeah, I mean, that's another part. I think the fact that they grew up so poor, and we're going to deal with the poverty when we get to Gladys, which is the 10th person in the story. This is the third one, I think. People who are poor and then rich, I don't know if they can handle being rich very well. They're not really sure what to do with it. I think it's not so much the case if you, for example, middle class. I think it's a very difficult leap either from poverty to extreme wealth, or in the opposite direction, extreme wealth to either no wealth or maybe even the middle class. I think it's hard. That's maybe the hardest transition of all, is having all of that and then not having it. Actually says the dream's the thing. The munchies. Pauline says, no, definitely not. Southern men I know are very chivalrous and polite, very mannerly. So I think that was an aspect with Elvis, that he did have manners, that he was a certain way, but didn't he change? Didn't he evolve? Didn't he become something else? Susan says, I dated a man from Mississippi and he was quite a gentleman. Katie said, he treated many with great generosity, including his cook. Isn't generosity a Southern trait? Sunflower says, I think he once was shy. The younger Elvis probably, fame probably changed that. Yeah, that makes sense. Also bear in mind, not only did he suffer poverty, but he also was made fun of. He was sort of bullied at school. So you can imagine you enjoy being liked so much more when you were not popular. the popularity is so much sweeter when you weren't popular. Roses are red. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next person in the story, Peggy Lipton. And let's see if I can find her picture. I think this is her, quite a pretty lady. So according to the Mirror, that's this story. There's a really good what's the word, collection of women at this link as well, some of which I've referred to here and some that sort of go beyond. So if you want to read about some additional women as well, you can go to that link. Yeah, yay, Peggy. I know Yvonne likes Peggy. So Peggy also wrote a tell-all book saying that Elvis kissed like a god but never managed much in bed. And once again, I can't help thinking about what's just come out in Johnny Depp and the whole erectile dysfunction thing. This whole link, the supposed link between substance abuse and erectile dysfunction. I couldn't help thinking when I read that, did Elvis have the same problem? And this seems to be confirmation of that. He kissed like a god, but never managed much in bed. That's not much of a compliment for a sex god. She wrote, it just didn't happen for him. We tried a few more times and nothing ever happened, so I just let it go. What do you think she's talking about? What did they try a few more times? What do you think that's in reference to? I know what I'm thinking. Now we are coming to halfway through this. Sybil Shepherd. Sybil Shepherd is definitely my favorite of these ladies. That's her over there. I loved Sybil Shepherd in Moonlighting with Bruce Willis. Just thought she's so sultry, just her being herself. She was such a sensuous person. I don't know, just everything about her very, very sexy. And this is quite interesting. According to the Mirror, quote, Hollywood star Sybil dropped a bombshell in 1988 saying, I don't think I've told anybody about this. I went out with Elvis. And it would be great to sort of do on the 50th anniversary, just ask social media, how many people have kissed Elvis? And imagine if social media could be honest, and everyone who's ever kissed Elvis is still alive, or you would imagine they would be, if they could honestly say, I did, how many people it would be. Anyway, one of them was Sybil Shepherd. She said, he's a really wonderful, sexy, incredible guy. That was her experience. But then she provides this insight, which is quite kind of curious. She says, during their relationship in the early 70s, now you kind of got to wonder, if you had a relationship with Elvis in the early 70s, wasn't that when Linda was in a relationship with Elvis? Because Linda was with him from 1972 to 1976. That's the entire early 70s, right? Did Linda know about Sybil? Did Sybil know about Linda? If Linda did know about Sybil, did it bother her? Shepherd says during their relationship in the early 1970s, she educated him about sex. She said, I think before I met him, he was sexually conservative, trapped in a stupid macho thing. I don't quite know what that means, but I've got a few ideas about that. I think she was teaching him perhaps to be a more considerate lover. Perhaps teaching him some techniques. Shepherd said she ended the romance after a month. She ended the relationship due to the king's drug habit. Good for you. Definitely good for you. So I don't know. That was for me quite an interesting one. Oh, I thought I didn't cover Anne Margaret Olson, but it looks like I have. quite a few of you say she was the one for Elvis. So let me ask you, is there anything wrong with this picture? So according to the Mirror, there was real chemistry between Elvis and his co-star from the 1964 film Viva Las Vegas. Obviously, there's a song about that as well. This is a Swedish actress. Her name is Anne Margaret Olsen, and she says they had a very strong, intense relationship. And it lasted almost 2 years. And so again, if you are a true crime rocket scientist, you're kind of going to go, okay, where are we in the timeline? And if you're thinking that way, well, then this is taking you into the timeline of another relationship. He was actually engaged to Priscilla, a young Priscilla, at the time that he was having this very strong, intense relationship with somebody else. And so you kind of get the impression that all of these women are like, it was awesome being in a relationship with Elvis, but then they don't say, well, he was actually cheating on me at the same time. They don't say that, but you kind of get the idea, maybe it was awesome anyway. In her autobiography, so she also wrote a book, and Margaret wrote, we both felt a current that went straight through us. We would become a force we couldn't control. Anyway, I'm not taking it further than that, but now we're going to deal with Priscilla. Now we're going on to his first wife, Priscilla Presley. And I'm not going to just go to Priscilla. We're going to deal with Anita Wood as well. That's this lady. Quite pretty as well. See if I can get a proper picture. That's the one. Oh dear. Okay. So according to, just done it again. According to the Mirror, quote, Elvis met singer and TV performer Anita Wood in 1957. So again, you've kind of got to wonder, so if he was with Anita Wood in 1957, when did he meet Olsen? And if he was with Olsen for 2 years, ... Anyway, Elvis persuaded Anita Wood to rip up a 7-year Paramount movie deal. So that's quite big. Paramount had offered her a 7-year contract, and he tells her, tear that up and come with me. And that's quite a commitment. She must tear up this 7-year deal, this chance of a lifetime, and go home with him to Memphis, to Graceland. So that's exactly what she does. And guess what happens like a year later? He goes off to the army, and he is now with Priscilla and sort of with Anne Margaret kind of thing. And she's just torn up a 7-year movie deal. Is Elvis still a Southern gentleman? Is he still a very nice, shy guy? Or is he having his cake and eating it? I quite like this picture of her, this one. That to me epitomizes Elvis and the whole thing that is going on. Let's just do it like that. Yvonne Phillips says, poor Peggy, glad she moved on. Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Yeah, Pauline says he's definitely eating his cake. Yeah. So in 1959, Elvis was drafted. Sorry, I think I said 1958. 1959, he was drafted into the army, and he was in West Germany. He wasn't even in America. And that's where he met Priscilla, and she was just 14 years old. While he was in the army, Elvis sent Anita letters, and he told her, don't show them to anybody. This is the Priscilla that he met? And so there's an article, Elvis left me for Priscilla, says girlfriend Anita Wood, but he wanted us both. And that's from 2020. And there's an article in the Express if you guys are interested in reading it. I mean, that is really the epitome of wanting your cake and eating it. But let me ask you, if you were a sexual God, a sort of divine sexual entity, would you be like, I'm going to be a good God? I'm going to just stick to the straight and narrow, and I'm not going to have any additional, I'm not going to sort of open the door to other experiences. You know, I'm a one man woman, or I'm a one woman man, or I'm a one person kind of thing, right? Or if you are offered this opportunity, are you going to kind of go crazy for as long as you can? So for a year, Elvis stayed with Anita while secretly romancing Priscilla. After several years of letter writing and phone calls, Priscilla's father eventually sort of relented and said, okay, you can move into Graceland during your senior year of high school. It's like, Priscilla's father's like, you know what, I'm really not happy with this idea of you being with this much older guy, but okay, now that you're in senior year, now it's fine. So the couple tied the knot. Priscilla and Elvis got married in 1967. They were obviously married for around about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, and they had their only child, Lisa Marie, in 1968. And so now you say, what was it like being married to Elvis? You know, what was it like being his wife, not just like his girlfriend? And you can see that the marriage didn't last very long. Where was that? Yeah, the marriage didn't last very long. So this is how I remember Priscilla Presley. I remember her from Dallas. And I remember other women from Dallas as well, Victoria Principal. But I remember, doesn't that kind of ring a bell? Doesn't it all bring back that sort of time in a way? By the way, I grew up in quite a strict home as well. My mother thought that Dallas was too racy for me, so I wasn't really allowed to watch it. Can you believe it? And I was about 17 years old. Yeah, so this is the kind of sad part to their marriage. Apparently, once she had a child, he wasn't interested in being intimate with her again. Once Priscilla had given birth to Lisa Marie, the romance seemed to die. And then not just that, there was infidelity on both sides following that. So, you know, it seems like there was a lot leading up to the marriage, and then when they did get married, bear in mind Lisa Marie was born like 1 year into the marriage. Seems like the romance died overnight, and then both of them sort of had affairs. Is that so? It's like I'm so envious of Priscilla Presley. I wish I was Priscilla Presley. I wish I had married Elvis. Do you really? Do you really wish that you were with him for a year and then he didn't sleep with you after that, and then he has affairs and then you have affairs? Would you really have liked that kind of marriage? And I mean, that's kind of the thing. Everyone looks at Elvis and like, I want to be with you. Well, that's the reality of being with you. Zircon says Elvis was kinky. Wow. Yvonne says my first husband dated Victoria Principal before we got together, but the marriage was a flop. Wow. Kudos to your first husband, Yvonne. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Lisa was born 9 months after the wedding. So basically 9 months after the wedding, that's the end of that kind of thing. That's the end of that sort of dimension. 12th man says, the one thing I really liked about Anne Margaret was she never said anything bad about Elvis. Is that a good thing? That, is that being real or is that being loyal? Should you be loyal when someone's not being loyal to you? So now we're going to deal with Lisa Marie. And I don't know whether you guys noticed this. Did you guys notice that in this plan of the upper floor of Graceland, there's the bathroom where he died. Remember the pillars to the front door over here. Can you guys see this? Sorry, the pillars to the front door over here. There's Elvis's bedroom. But right over there, can you see over there? That is Lisa Marie's bedroom. So Lisa Marie was really almost like right outside Elvis's bathroom as well. And so if you're going to say, why didn't Ginger hear anything? You could also say, why didn't Lisa Marie hear anything? Of course, Ginger was a lot closer. There's the sort of entrance. But nevertheless, Lisa Marie also shared this living space up here. And I kind of want to address something, it's sort of a little bit of a gripe. In the previous, I think it was the previous live that I did on Elvis, I said something that kind of shocked me and I only discovered while, sort of doing the research was obviously in true crime, you want to look at the crime scene. So I was like, I want to see this bathroom, right? I want to see that part of the bathroom. And I said, so I started looking for it. And I was looking and looking and looking, and I just could not find it. Only to discover that the official policy at Graceland right now is that no one's allowed upstairs. And obviously no one's allowed to video or photograph anything from upstairs, and that it never has been, kind of thing. Only for folks in chat to say, that's not true. You can actually see the bathroom. It's on this YouTuber's channel, or there are photos of the bathroom. And they were really like insisting. They were saying, I'll send you the link and you can check that out. And I was like, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go and look at the link and, there's not going to be anything there. And I was like, okay. So that's literally what happened. Someone sent me a link. I went and looked at it, and it was like the sort of clickbaity title was view of something like the bedroom and bathroom where Elvis died, something like that. And it's like, wow, okay. And I think, I don't know if it got so many million views or whatever. And so when you go there, it is a photo of this, like that part of the bathroom. So it's kind of like saying, sorry, it's more like this side. Like on your left is the crime, is the scene. We're not gonna, you can't see that, but if you look straight in front of you, you can see the shower. But that is where Elvis died. But there is a big hand in front of your face, but don't pay any attention to that. So what you're looking at right now, although you've got a hand over one side of your face, what you're looking at right now is a view of where Elvis died. No, it's not, because you can't actually see. You can't see the toilet. You can't see the black chair that's there. You can't see this whole quadrant of the bathroom. That's what you can't see. That's what you want to see. You can barely even see the floor in that photo, right? The other side to that thing is if you say, no, 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 you can see all that. It's like you're saying, oh, there is no attempt to cover that up. There is no attempt to have like positive PR. Actually, it's all out there and it's not a big mystery. No, it is being PR'd, and you can't actually see a picture of that. And if you say you can, well, then I will say, okay, but the part I want to see and the part you want to see are different. I want to see the part where in the description he died. You maybe want to see the part where, okay, we are in the same room. I can see the light. Okay, so that's good enough for me. It's not good enough for me. Does that make sense? Stephanie says, yes, I was looking to see if there was a carpet. Okay, so that's just one thing to bear in mind, is that Lisa Marie's bedroom is right there. And that's the part I want to kind of just say, where if you say which woman in the story could have or should have perhaps an influence on saving Elvis, right? Well, if you say not Ginger, for whatever reason, you might say Ginger's mother was sort of in control and she was very young and whatever, right? If that's your argument, then you could say Elvis's daughter is actually there, and surely Elvis wants to stay alive for his daughter. Surely Elvis wants to try and be healthy for his daughter. Surely Elvis wants to be a father for his daughter. And that's where you ask her and you say, what was it like being the king's daughter? And so that's something that we do ask. Tommy, thanks very much. Appreciate it. So when Lisa Marie was asked, what kind of guy was Elvis? Was he a strict dad? And then she says, not surprisingly, he was not strict at all. He would sleep all day. I mean, I think that you can't say it better than that. Was your dad strict? No, he slept all day. Was your dad making sure you didn't do X, Y, Z? No, he was sleeping all day. She says, and I knew no one was going to tell me what to do because they'd get fired. But my mom was very strict. And so, again, you've kind of got to wonder, could Priscilla, because she was quite strict, could she have done something? Because her daughter is within the situation. Does her mother approve of the situation? Does her mother have any power within the situation? But anyway, you've got a situation here where Elvis isn't strict towards his daughter, and he tends to, it seems like he gives the people he loves whatever they want. When people are getting whatever they want, well, thanks a lot, Becky and Ricardo. Thanks a lot. Think about this. When people are getting what they want from you, are those people going to say, can you please stop doing this or doing that? In other words, it's kind of a transactional relationship, isn't it? In exchange for getting stuff, I'll not cause any problems. I won't rock the boat. I won't criticize you. I won't make your life any harder. I won't, let's just kind of go with the flow. You give me stuff and I go with the flow. Isn't that the sort of cliche of Elvis's life and the people around him? You give me stuff and I'll go with the flow. In other words, the whole thing is running on a river of greed. And if you sort of look at that and you think, that's not very nice of Elvis. If you think of the fact that he was poor, he grew up poor, then his generosity in another way, you can imagine being a little bit different. He's generous because he knows what it's like to suffer. He knows what it's like to go without. But also, I think he doesn't really know the value of money, and also he doesn't know. What I mean is that you shouldn't just give things away. People should, to some extent, earn and be accountable for it. Also, you don't control people through what you give them. There should be a space for people to be with you despite that. Yeah, all transactional. Okay. Now we go to Connie Stevens. That is, where is she? I think that's Connie Stevens. According to the Mirror, quote, the actress caught Elvis's eye when he saw her on TV. That was in a detective series called Hawaiian Eye, and that was on for about 4 years, up until 1963. Elvis called her on set, and then they dated for 2 years. She said the following: I knew this was a fellow who could break your heart. He was just so beautiful. He was one of the loves of my life. I could have spent a lifetime with him, but I knew it was never to be. I was content to have that little part in his heart that was real. So again, let me just ask you, if you think about where she says, I could have spent a lifetime with him, do you think that that's true? Do you think anyone could have spent a lifetime with Elvis? Priscilla was the only one who married him, and the marriage basically lasted 9 months. Do you think anyone could have spent a lifetime with Elvis? And that brings us to the final woman in the story, Gladys. Do I have Gladys's picture here? There it is. So it's it's not news to us. It was shown in the movie Elvis. It is part of the mythology of the king of rock and roll, that he was kind of a mama's boy. You kind of got the idea that his mother struggled with anxiety because of the circumstances of his birth. His brother died, his twin brother died when he was born. And you can imagine being poor and also being born to a situation like that. She was afraid that something would happen to him, right? According to smoothradio.com, this is just a bit of background on Gladys. Let me share some of these photos with you. Let's just bring it up like that. So this is from some background from smoothradio.com. Her name was Gladys Love Smith. She was born on April 25th, 1912. Her early life was very, very different from the wealth that Elvis accumulated in his time, and very early on. Remember, he was barely out of high school when he went to Graceland. But what was quite interesting was the way that he provided for his own parents. And she was actually the daughter of a cotton farmer. And in the 1930s, she met Vernon Presley in church. That is already telling you a lot, that they were quite simple folk. What do they call it? That sort of got their feet on the ground and their hands in the dirt kind of thing. They are very down to earth people, and also very traditional Southerners, I'd say, in the sense of the farming, um, pious, hardworking, people, and who are perhaps also quite musical. She was 4 years older than her husband. Vernon was 17. He was actually underage. And then they actually lied about their ages in order to get married in 1933. And I've highlighted that because I think that's really important. Why do you think that's important? Why do you think this particular comment is important? Why do you think that's worth highlighting? Tommy says, I don't think he grew much hair on his body, not much facial hair. Well, I don't know if you know that this is supposed to be part Cherokee. That's why he's got so thick hair. Actually, his hair wasn't black, it was a brownish color, but he certainly had thick hair. But apparently, it's the Cherokee aspect, which is why he's so hairless. Yeah, young bride again. But the other aspect is that both parents are lying. You might say it's harmless, but in terms of quite a serious thing, in terms of a contract that's being signed, a lifelong contract that's being signed. And so you can imagine them chuckling about it, and it's kind of a family joke. And you can imagine Elvis sort of seeing that and saying, sometimes you need to bend the rules so that things can kind of work out. And then he meets a guy like Colonel Parker. You can see how he would be quite susceptible to a strong character like that. Does that make sense? Yes, it sets a standard. Yeah. And remember this. So remember this whole thing about they lied about their ages. You might say, no, man, it's not really relevant. It's a one-off thing. We're going to talk about Vernon's backstory, and we're going to see, is lying not a big deal there either, right? And that's where I think it gets quite interesting. Well, it's already almost 2.5 hours. I need to wrap up. Susan says she may have been pregnant. Um, that's quite, I think, astute of you. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it's certainly worth thinking about. So, yeah, Gladys soon became pregnant, and she gave birth on January 8, 1935. Right. So I don't know whether she had to get pregnant. She had to get married if they got married in 33 and a full year passed before she gave birth. She did get pregnant quite soon, but I don't think it was a shotgun wedding. And then, obviously, as we know, there was this tragedy at birth. Elvis loses his twin brother. And I think some people never get over that. Some people never get over that. You must remember, often with us, often with the cases we cover, people are shaped by their parents in ways that are permanent. People are shaped by their childhoods that in ways that you can't actually believe how um, significant it is. And so you've got to wonder about this. I don't necessarily mean the impact of Jesse Garon Presley, Elvis's older brother who died. I don't necessarily mean directly on Elvis, I mean indirectly. I mean, on what is the impact of his brother's death indirectly on his mother? Did it make his mother a more nervous person than she otherwise would have been? Did it make her worry about Elvis more than she should have? And didn't that lead to Gladys herself um, needing to soothe this anxiety? And so, how does she soothe the anxiety? And the answer is through drinking, through alcohol, through taking diet pills, right? And doesn't Elvis then learn that coping strategy from his mother? Doesn't he learn how to deal with his anxiety, which is at a much greater scale in a way? You know, it's dealing with all sorts of other things that to some extent we may not even be able to imagine. And he tries to deal with it in the same way that his mother did, alcohol and pills. Does that make sense? So according to smoothradio.com, Gladys believed that when one twin died, the one that lived got all the strength of both. Do you think that's true in this story? Do you think it's true that Elvis got the strength of both twins? Or do you think that it's actually the opposite, that Elvis actually was, in a way, fatally undermined right in the beginning of his life by the death of his brother, which in a weird way would lead to the death of his mother when he left? I think when he left to go to the army, I think it brought back that devastation of not having children in a way, even though it was not necessary, you know, obviously he was still alive, but I can't be without my son kind of thing. And I can talk a little bit about that out of personal experience, where I had a very devoted mother. I lost my mother when I was 17. I was very close to my mother. And my mother really struggled when my brother was sent to boarding school in another town. And even though it was actually her decision and my father's decision, it was like they decided to send him away, my mother found it very, very hard to let him go and to deal with that, to the extent that I think 2 years later, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 years later, he actually came back. Funny enough, I'm the only child in our family that wasn't sent to boarding school. Look how well I turned out. But I mean, the point is, my mother really struggled with that thing of someone leaving the nest. And I can take it further, and this is really tragic. When I was about to leave the nest, when I was about to write my final exams, and I was also going to go to the military. In that time, it was the mandatory military service, and I decided I'm going to complete mine, just get it over with. So it meant I was going to do the same thing that my brother had kind of done. I was going to be away from home for an extended period of time. And my mom, my mom actually committed suicide just before I wrote those final exams. And so I went into the military about a month after my mother, what was it? Yeah, I think essentially 4 months after my mother died, I went to the military. And I think going to the military helped me in a sense, because I had to march and do everything else. But I'm just saying what impact that had on this lady. And that's why I'm sharing with you that the story is because I think it really did have a big impact. Losing the one child meant it was so hard to lose the other child, even if it wasn't forever. And so that's also going to have an impact on Elvis. Does that make sense? You know, you can almost in a way wonder whether Elvis blames himself. You know, which is when I was away that something happened to mom, kind of thing, right? Sunflower says the loss of his brother probably drew Elvis closer to his mom. And so Elvis maybe thought, I wish I could have saved her, I should have saved her, kind of thing. And then that whole line of thinking propels him into his own, well, you know, can he save himself? And then he soothes himself the same way that his mother did. Okay, so going back to the article, quote, Gladys always kept Elvis close, perhaps due to the trauma of losing his twin brother. So you kind of got to wonder, would Elvis have been the mama's boy that he was? And bear in mind, when you're a mama's boy, you don't really learn the coping strategies you should. You don't individuate in a healthy way that you should, because mama is making the decisions. You are under mama's sort of apron. And you're supposed to make friends, you're supposed to have girlfriends, you're supposed to make mistakes, you're supposed to stub your toe and deal with the pain. And mama is now trying to protect Elvis from all of those things. So going back to the article, quote, Elvis's fame sadly would start Gladys's downward spiral. So Gladys doesn't want to lose Elvis, but guess what happens? When Elvis becomes famous, and he's got his own needs for that because he wasn't really very popular, he doesn't feel very powerful. He feels like he's growing up in this maelstrom of sort of death and poverty, and he wants to escape it. And boy, does he. But by becoming famous, she loses touch with him. She loses control. She loses, to some extent, that connection with him. And so although he doesn't die, and she doesn't technically lose him, it feels like she's losing him. It feels like another son that is sort of lost, but in a totally different way. So the article really succinctly says, while very proud of Elvis, Gladys found his fame hard to deal with, because she was close to him, right? She was close to him. Elise, I only want to touch on that in the next episode. I wish I could actually delete that, but people have probably seen it already. I hate it when people jump the gun. I'm trying to sort of go through it step by step. Anyway, not that it's your fault. It's just what I'm trying to do. Yeah, she lived in fear of losing him, and obviously she is going to lose him in a very big way. He is going to be caught up in all this labyrinth of relationships that I've just taken you through. They're going to be caught up in his the glitz and glamour of his life, and he's going to be caught up in one pretty little thing after another. Yeah, I agree with you. Gladys looks miserable in this photo. And look at it, both their attentions are on her. Elvis seems to be trying to soothe his mother, and his father is sort of looking on. So do you see just how much his past wasn't past? It was still something that was going to be haunting him. The loss of his mother, and also the loss of his brother. While at Elvis's Memphis mansion, neighbors also apparently mocked Gladys. So she struggled to be a sort of high society lady, right? You can kind of imagine Gladys is now propelled into this sort of upper class, who's who A-list thing. And you can see she's just not that kind of person. She's a simple daughter of a cotton farmer. And now she's got to wear these sort of glamorous dresses and do the whole celebrity thing. And she's not really cut out for that. And so she starts to withdraw. She starts to become lonelier and more insecure. And she actually says, it's actually quite incredible. She says, I wish we were poor again. I really do. That says it all, doesn't it? That says just how unhappy she was with their good fortune. And if you think about how this story ends, she dies, Elvis dies prematurely, and then Vernon also dies shortly after that. All of them died prematurely, and you kind of got to ask, was it worth it? And she certainly felt like it wasn't. I didn't want this for me. Well done, Elvis, but this isn't really very good for me. Is it very good for you? Is it very good for us? Right? And it adds a weird sort of what's the word? Sort of a miasma to this whole story. Is if Elvis could have lived his whole life all over again, would he have lived it the way that he did? Obviously, we wish that he did. Would Vernon want it that way, knowing that his son would die, seeing his son dead as well? Would he want it that way? Would he say, you know what, we had all of these amazing experiences, it was all worth it? Was it? Was being the king of rock and roll a fairy tale? Or was it actually a nightmare? It was certainly a nightmare for Gladys. It was a nightmare at the end, I think, for Elvis as well. I mean, he wasn't taking those drugs because the ride itself was so much fun. There was an aspect to it, to the ride itself, that wasn't fun, right? Bilby says, hi, I hope I haven't missed too much. You've missed quite a lot. I actually need to wrap up, but this is quite important. So she got depressed. She wished that they were poor. She wished that this whole wonderful life hadn't happened to her, hadn't happened to them. She was being laughed at for feeding chickens on the lawn. She was laughed at for sort of being the farmer's daughter that she was. She didn't know how to reinvent herself. She was also made fun of for doing her laundry outdoors. Like, haven't you heard of a washing machine? And it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun being made fun of. And so she got sick, just like her son got sick. She got hepatitis. Just like her son started drinking, well, really, it's the other way around. Just like she got sick, Elvis got sick. Just like she started drinking, Elvis started drinking. Just like she took pills, he took pills. Just like she died as a result of all of that, so did he. And here's the kicker. If you think there's not a link between one family member and another, or there's a tenuous link, look at the date that his mother dies. She dies on August 14, 1958, right? August 14, 1958. That's almost exactly 20 years before Elvis died. Elvis died on August 16, 1978. She died 46 years old. Elvis didn't even live as long as his mother lived. And so anyway, here is the kicker. What do you think the cause of death was of his mother? What do you think the cause of death was of his mother? Well, here it is. The cause of death was a heart attack, and it was discovered that a contributing factor was liver failure due to alcohol poisoning. So in other words, she died of a heart attack, but that was as a result of being ill from other things. And that was as a result of taking a lot of medication that she shouldn't have been, contraindications and polypharmacy. Exactly the same thing. He dies of exactly the same thing that his mother dies of. Yeah, 12th man says Elvis didn't drink alcohol because that's what killed his mother, but he did everything else. He also died of polypharmacy. Yeah, so 12th man is kind of making the case that no, this is totally different. And you can make that case. I'm not making that case though. So you might say, no, that part doesn't apply. And I'm trying to say that applies. Do you see the link? But if you want to say no, it's totally unrelated. That's then the other side of the story. And so this is the last photo I want to share with you guys of Elvis and his mother. It's quite a sweet photo, isn't it? Just bring it up like that. So, I think one of the morals of the story is that you can't turn your child into a symbol. You can't turn your child into a symbol of the other child that you lost, or a symbol of how you deal with the world. You've got to sort your own life out. By the same token, you can't turn your life into some sort of pilgrimage to your parent or something like that. You've kind of got to take life on its own terms. You've kind of got to say, okay, all of that shit happened, and I'm not going to, and I've thought about it. I've absorbed it as much as I can, and life goes on. I think when you start living in a symbolic way through your tragedy, in a symbolic way through your trauma, it can only end in tears. I think if you want to have not a fairy tale, but a good life, I think you've got to say, I'm not going to have the fairy tale. And that might sound terrible to say, I'm not going to have the fairy tale. But look at what Sybil Shepherd did. She was realistic enough to say, this isn't a fairy tale, this is a nightmare. When you go after the fairy tale, you end up getting the nightmare. The only way to get the fairy tale is to be realistic, not to be sort of going into the world dreaming, right? And so you can kind of see this with Elvis. When you're going after the fairy tale, you're losing touch with reality. That's why I say, be realistic. And you might say, being realistic isn't fun. Being realistic means you can't take drugs, you can't have these ill-advised experiences. Well, do you want to ultimately get sick and die in vomit with your head snuffed in a shag carpet? So you might say, I insist on having this happy experience. Well, there's a dark side to that. If you're not going to be realistic, if you're not going to see reality, if no one's going to be allowed to remind you of reality, do you see that? If you are going to be authentic and say, I'm going to have less fun, but I'm going to be more realistic about it, well, then you can have your chance of having a good life is better. Julie says, it's reminding me of George Best. His mother died of alcoholism that got much worse after George got famous. That's a good point. Katie says, substance abuse can be related to alcohol abuse. Alcohol is a substance. Okay, so I'm not taking it any further than that. I am quite shocked that this is, again, almost 3 hours. I'm going to try and in future cut it down to not more than 2:30. But did you guys find this interesting? So we've kind of gone through 10 women in Elvis's life. Let's ask the question again. Who do you think had the best chance of saving him? Pauline says, I wonder if he sang to his mother. John says, the dream of wealth and the drive and energy will all be gone once it's accomplished. Nisi says, take care of your bum. Well, the only way to take care of it is to stop right now and stand and stretch and whatnot. Anyway, like I said, I'm not going to be doing a live on Thursday and possibly also Friday. So I think this is the fifth episode. Is it the fifth or the sixth episode in the series? The next one is going to be dealing with the men in Elvis's life, and I think it's going to be a stronger narrative than this one. Even I think there's some shockers there. I know exactly what material I'm going to use to go into that. So I'm hoping that's going to be very interesting to you guys. I know Stephanie's enjoying this. Sharon Butler also says very interesting. But do you see how we're looking at it? We're looking at it not just through one dimension of his life, but several. And then we're also saying, what do we take out of it in terms of how you approach things like excess and the opposite sex or whoever is your partner and parents and your approach to a fairy tale? Is this idea where you think, I wish I had lots of money, I wish I was popular, is it all it's cracked out to be? Because ultimately you've got to then live up to that. Ultimately you're not seen who you are but as Mr. Moneybags. Ultimately you're seen as not who you are but the image that you've created. And this is something that all of these pop stars have got to live up to. Michael Jackson, Elvis, everyone, that they've got to live up to the image that they've created, and that's not always fun. It's like, I want to be ordinary me. That's actually who I am. No, 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 no. You can't wear that. You can't do that. You've got to be this thing that actually you're not. This fictional thing. In other words, you become a slave to your own legend, and that's the part that I think is very hard for these legends to convey. It's like, boo hoo hoo, my life is so horrible. Well, how can a person who's poor and invisible ever understand you? Do you get what I'm saying? It's very hard to get sympathy when you've got so much to be grateful for, that you should be. Stephanie says, interesting that Lisa Marie married Michael Jackson. I must say, I thought that had PR written all over it. And then it also makes you think, if you're a pawn for PR, what does that say in a way about you? Does it say you're a PR genius, or does it say that, I don't know, you'll do anything for money? Or does it say that PR is just a way of life? Joy Jones says, I have to replay. You do. Okay, so that is it. I've got to end this before 3 hours. I've got to start cutting down. I want to thank the mods and the members who've been here. You've all been great. There have been some fantastic comments and fantastic questions, and some of you have also sort of set me straight, this and that. I don't know if you guys know, not only did Elvis never drink, but also Donald Trump, because of what happened in his backstory. So it has a lifelong bearing, doesn't it? True Jedi Forever, this is really great. Always nice hearing things like that. Bulby says, thoroughly enjoying the series. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Okay, so again, thanks, mods. Thanks, members. I'll obviously let you know when the next episode will be, probably not Thursday, but maybe Friday or Saturday. We'll see. Don't forget the Van Gogh letters tomorrow, Wednesday, every Wednesday and every Sunday. That's members only. And bear in mind, we're going through a very interesting period now with that as well. There's also a death waiting in that story. And so that's a very, in a way, tragic journey he's about to go on. What impact did his father's death have, both in spurring him on, in allowing him to become his own person, and also, I don't know, maybe in another sense. So look out for that. That's the idea. The idea is that it's a thoughtful discussion, that we think about things we haven't thought about before. or in different ways. So I just felt like I wanted to sort of go into a true crime space that I cared about and I thought would be quite interesting. And although this isn't the traditional true crime thing, it certainly touches on a lot of things we think about: timeline, character, um, crime scene, although there's not necessarily a crime scene here, but also the dynamics between different people. And obviously, it feels like in a way a crime did happen here, doesn't it? It feels like there is a criminal shadow in this, and I do think there's quite a lot of dishonesty here, not in the level of like you know the dishonesty we normally deal with, but just very human dishonesty, or very human being, like a lack of being honest with ourselves about things. And it's things that take advantage of our human frailties, the ego, to some extent greed, to some extent vanity, to some extent things we all want. We all want more money, more popularity, more to be well regarded. We all want to be beautiful, right? What happens when you get all of those things? What do you do with all of that? And isn't there a way to a good and happy life without necessarily having those things? And the answer is yes. Find your way to that. Okay, so that is it. Let's just deal with the final few questions. Joy Jones says, according to my mama who got to touch him in Nashville, said his skin was velvet but hair like a brick. That's quite a comment. Bobby says, my apologies if I upset anyone yesterday. I'm not really sure what that's about, but thanks for that. Zircon says, my daughter is going to the Van Gogh exhibit in Louisville. That should be interesting. Yeah. So quite a few of you interested in Van Gogh. I wonder if there's much crossover. Think about it. One of the greatest artists ever, Vincent van Gogh or Elvis Presley, or both. Okay. So I've thanked the mods, I've thanked the members. Thanks a lot also to the subscribers. If there's some new subscribers, welcome to you guys. And then also thanks a lot for the super chats. Once again, a reminder, if you're watching this on replay, if you're getting a lot out of it, if it's resonating with you, instead of giving whatever, $5, give how much you think it's moved you. And if it hasn't moved you at all, but you think it's worth something, give $1. If it's moved you a lot and you feel it's really, something that edifies YouTube to some extent, something that is content that is really meaningful for you, you're welcome to sort of show that, with a bigger contribution. So as I say, if it means nothing to you, well, you can either give nothing or give $1. But if it means more, give more. So yeah, that's my little, if you're in church, the pastors will say something like that. You'll be blessed by how much you give. I actually feel a bit self-conscious and silly saying it like that. But anyway, Twelfth Man says, thanks for your time. Thanks also for your critical thinking and your input on some of the facts. It's always good to have that. Okay, guys, I've got like 1 minute left to beat the 3-hour deadline. So I'm going to say adios. Take care. If you're in America, stay cool. And again, we're thinking about the folks in Kentucky. Hopefully things are being sorted out there. I'll see you guys, the Van Gogh folks, I'll see you guys tomorrow. All the best.